We pray this morning that you might be with us here as we study your word, that we might honor and glorify you. For us these things in your precious name. Amen. All right, here we go. Justice. So, when you think about justice, what do you think about? What comes to mind whenever you think about justice? Court? The law? Anything else? What? The Supreme Court? Consequences? Right? There's a lot of stuff that comes to mind whenever we talk about justice. Now, I'm going to skip the first slide, so don't worry about it. So, how many television programs have justice in the name? A lot, right? I didn't put American Justice up there, which is one of my favorites, but there's a bunch. Justice, Justice, Injustice, Chicago Justice, Cajun Justice, which I guess is a... Huh? Is it? I've seen it on. I've never watched it. I've seen the commercials for it. So, and then how many shows that don't have justice, but were about law? Boston Legal, L.A. Law, Judge Judy, Law and Order. Perry Mason. Remember Perry Mason? That was a great show. And then Matlock, and then Forensic Files, which is like a true crime, on CNN where they investigate crime, what happened, or everything. So, a lot of stuff out there about justice in television. And then you go to the movies, and those are all movies dealing, and those are just a drop in the bucket of what is out there about legal stuff. Like, remember all those, they made all those, John Grisham wrote all those stories about legal stuff, right? And there was The Client, The Pelican Brief, all that. There was like 15 of his movies they did that were legal movies, and they were all about courtroom procedures and stuff. And the courtroom really is pretty boring. If you've ever went like for jury duty and you sit there and listen to the stuff, it's really not very exciting. It's really very boring. But we really obsess over this stuff. I mean, it makes billions of dollars every year watching what... You want to see if things are working out the way you think they should. Anybody remember the O.J. trial? Did that work out like it should have? Probably not, right? So was justice done there? We would probably all say no. But that's just, my opinion. So, okay, so in Texas, we have what is known as the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. It's the prison system, okay? They have 100 prisons in Texas. Doesn't that seem nuts? So whenever I started working there in 1989, we had about 25 prisons. Now we have 100. There's 134,668 inmates in Texas prisons. That's a lot of folks locked up in Texas. And so 33,000 full-time employees, $4 billion budget in 2024 that you're spending, right, to house these people. So in addition to prisons, it oversees pardons and paroles, community justice assistance division, private facility contracting, and oversight. There's a lot to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Institutional Division. Then we have the Federal Department of Justice, right, the DOJ. Do you hear about that in the news any right now? Every day, right? Every day there's something in the news about the Department of Justice. Attorney General heads that up. And so there's all kinds, there's the FBI, DEA, ATF, and the U.S. Marshals. They're all underneath the Department of Justice. And so they have lots of law enforcement capacity underneath there. 115,000 full-time employees. 115,000. That's a lot of folks. $49 billion budget. $49.5 billion budget last year. So then the IRS, Department of Transportation, Department of the Interior, Department of Homeland Security all have enforcement divisions as well. So that's not all you... There's a lot of other stuff that goes on, and I can guarantee you, so in the state of Texas, how many different law enforcement agencies are there that can arrest you, that are Texas law enforcement agencies? Well, you have every city that's a city of any size has a police department, right? So how many cities are big enough to have a police department? I grew up in Florence, about 1,000 people. They have like 10 cops. So, but they like to give out speeding tickets. So that's a whole other, on 195 to fellow soldiers driving through town. Okay, so how many towns are in Texas? Lots of towns. I will slow down. Every county in Texas has a sheriff's department, right? So that's, in addition to that, we have the Texas Department of Public Safety, right? The Highway Patrol. You have game wardens, right? Which are also a law enforcement agency in the state of Texas. In Williamson County, I don't know that every county has this. The DA's office has a team of investigators that are law enforcement that works directly for the DA's office that can arrest you. So justice is a big deal. There's a lot of people who have something to do with justice as we see it in the United States. And hopefully you won't encounter anybody that's looking to deal out justice in your direction, but there's a lot of people out there that have control over your lives. You need to realize that. There's a lot of people out there that have control and can do things that maybe you don't want done. And so justice is a big thing. And you want them to do what? Be fair, right? You want them to be fair. You don't want to get arrested for something you did not do, right? So there was a guy that got arrested here in Georgetown, actually in Round Rock, for killing his wife, right? And he was put in prison for killing his wife. And 12 years in, I believe, they had evidence that proved that he did not kill his wife, DNA evidence. And they'd had it all along, and they didn't submit it. And so he was convicted, and so he sued. There's a really good movie. I can't think of the name of the movie right now, but it's really good. And they filmed it in the Williamson County Courthouse. You can watch it, where he discusses everything. And so over that, the DA at the time lost his law license, and he should, because he did not put into evidence things that would have exonerated the guy immediately. So, and the guy won $4 million, a $4 million lawsuit against the Williamson County. So we paid him $4 million, which he deserved. I mean, you're in prison, that ruins your life. So we want to be right whenever we do something dealing with someone's life, right? You don't want to lock somebody up. And what if he'd have faced the death penalty and been executed? That's a big deal. So, man, there's a lot of high, visibility cases where things go wrong, people get convicted that are not actually guilty, and sometimes, however, I will say this, I think we try to do the best that we can, right? I don't think that we're usually intentionally unfair. So, I just put this up here, 52 court systems within the United States. 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the federal courts. Lots and lots of courts, right? Lots and lots and lots of courts. It's amazing how many courts there are. If you look at the actual map showing all the federal courts with their jurisdiction and everything, there's a ton. Alpine, Texas, which is 6,000 people, has a huge federal court building where they try federal court cases for West Texas. It's a little bitty tiny town, but there's a federal court. So we worked on the federal courthouse in Austin when they built it. They built it, it's been 10 or 15 years, brand new, big, huge, 5-story federal courthouse in Austin, Texas. Lots of federal cases in Austin, though. So, how would you define justice? If you're looking to define it, what would you say justice is? Anybody? Keeping the peace. What did you say? Peggy? Punishment is an aspect of justice, yes. Okay, let's just look at the definition here. It's long. So, the classic historical definition is conformity to God's moral standard as revealed in the Ten Commandments and the royal law, which is love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, that's the basic outline of what defines what justice is for us. Okay, so community of justice is living in right relationship with God and others, giving people their due as image bearers of God. Okay. Distributive justice, impartially rendering out judgment, righting wrongs, and meting out punishment for lawbreaking, which is what we most commonly think about whenever we think about justice. When we talk about justice, that's what we're thinking about probably most of the time. In all those television shows and movies, we're dealing with that kind of stuff, right? Somebody did something, we go out and we catch them, we try them, we punish them. This is what we do. So, fair, impartial justice, reserved for God and ordained authorities, including parents in the home. So yes, you do have the right to mete out justice to your children in the home. That's something that you're supposed to do, right? Is it always good and fair justice? Probably not, right? It is swift. That is correct. It is swift. So, parents in the home, elders in the church, and some on the board of elders. How often do you think we mete out justice here at Zion? Zero? Incorrect. I have been in several things where justice was rendered, okay? And several meetings where we had things that we had to deal with. And it's no fun, but it still has to be done. In the church where I came from prior to this, we had an instance where we excommunicated some people. And that's a form of church justice, right? It's the ultimate form for any church body, right? That you would excommunicate them from you. So, not much fun. So, teachers in the school, Is that still the case? Probably not, right? Most of the time, no. And authorities in the state, civil authorities in the state. Fair and impartial. Fair and impartial.
Isn't that
Lori.
what a jury does when you're selected either for civil or criminal?
Isn't that what a jury does? Yes, the jury does decide cases, right? You have the right to be tried by a jury of your peers, people that look like you. You know, that's kind of one of the big things nowadays is you select a jury, but is that jury really representative of who I am? You know, that's kind of there's a big argument about that. If you've ever been selected for a jury and go sit in the courtroom and listen to them actually select the jury and go through that process, it's really incredibly boring, but the questions are really stupid, you know, really, to me. Because whenever they ask me something, all you have to say to get off is say, I can tell by looking at him, he did it. And they will let you off immediately. But I never make it that far because I worked for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Institutional Division, and when they say, have you ever served in a law enforcement capacity? I say, well, no, but I did work for the prison system. They say, you're excused, and that's it. So, you know. So, modern redefinition of what justice is. Deconstructing traditional systems and structures deemed to be oppressive and redistributing power and resources from oppressors to their victims in the pursuit of equality of outcome. That's a lot different definition, is it not? It's basically the redistribution of power, wealth, things to people that don't have it from the people who do have it. Because it's unjust as viewed nowadays for anyone to have any more than anybody else. Okay? You can't have any more than anybody else. That's essentially where we're starting from in that. And we'll talk a lot more about that if we get to that. So there's a bunch of stuff in this chapter. I mean, a bunch of stuff. It's amazing, really, how much stuff there's. So, what's the marked difference between the two definitions? I know you can't see it, so we'll just look at it. So, traditional justice works to ensure that all are treated equally under God's divine law. Forgiveness is available for those that transgress, and no one is above the law. We're all subject to it. We're all the same under the law, right? The modern, skip past it. Let's see if I can go back here. I can. The modern definition is only concerned with equity of outcome, meaning that whenever justice is served, everyone is equal at the end. That's the point. So the overreaching goal is that everyone should be the same. No forgiveness, no individual freedom, right? There's no room for forgiveness. There's no room for freedom. Everybody's going to be exactly the same, and we're going to be treated exactly the same. You know, that's why whenever you have like zero tolerance policies, right, which that sounds good, but not every situation is the same. And so zero tolerance policies make some crazy stuff happen sometimes, okay? That's an offshoot of that. So, according to Webster's 1828 Dictionary of the English Language, justice means straight or close. Justice is alignment to a standard of goodness. In fact, goodness and righteousness are synonymous with justice, right? Goodness and righteousness. To be a right judge, you have to be both good and righteous. You can't be a right judge without that. You just can't. And so, is there any guarantee that the people who are judging over us, at least civil authorities, are good and right people? Good and right-minded people? There really isn't, is there? And there's a lot of decisions that are made every day that we look at and go, that's just not right. And that doesn't, so we're fortunate. So who knows Scott Matthew? Everybody should know him to some degree, right? For the most part. I mean, went here for a long time. His wife, Renee Matthew, coached girls volleyball and girls basketball and everything. Well, he's a judge. He's Judge Matthew in Williamson County. He's the head of the Juvenile Justice Division in Williamson County. And so he deals with that. And anybody that you talk to who knows him thinks that he is a very right-minded, well thought of person who does things the way they should be done. He's well respected. And so that's what you want. But why is he well respected? Because he does things like a Christian does things. That's why. You know, he tries to do the correct thing. So I like him a lot. He was on the Board of Elders here whenever I first started on the Board of Elders. So, and whenever I was talking about some of those discipline things that went on, he and I dealt with some of that together. And it really is amazing how good he is at doing those kind of things. And it takes a certain kind of person to be able to deal with those type things. You know, like it's not easy. So antonyms for justice would be injustice or evil. Evil is not going to be just, right? There's no justice in evil. There just is not. So, How do we, finite and fallible humans, discover the transcendent moral standard? How do we know what justice is? How do we know what the standard for justice is? God's Word, okay. Common sense, okay. Watching others. If only people had common sense, that would be great. But they do not. So, first, we find it in God, the creator of the universe, whose very character is goodness, righteousness, and holiness. He is morally perfect. Okay? What God is just. If you want to know what justice looks like, God is just. He defines what justice is. He is the moral plumb line who determines what is good and right for all people for all time. Since He doesn't change, the standard doesn't change. And that's extremely important to understand, that the laws that we face, like in a civil society in which we live, they change according to the whim of the people, right? We can vote in all kinds of crazy stuff. And so prohibition, for example, right? They prohibited the sale and consumption of alcohol in the United States. Is that biblical? Some people would say yes, I would say no. But it got voted in anyway. And was it a good thing? No. There was war, basically, in the country because of that, between the federal government and other people. So not a good thing. So we can't guarantee that things that get voted in are always going to be righteous. But God is the same right now as He has been since the beginning of time, before anything ever existed. So, a reasonable question is, if God is perfect and righteous, can man, us, who is fallen and imperfect, really ever know Him? Yes, we can. And how? Jesus. Okay, we'll get to that. So, God communicates His character to us inwardly. Every person, as an image bearer of God, has a built-in sense of right and wrong, which is what Terry said, essentially, right? You should have some kind of a built-in character that tells you what you're doing is right or what you're doing is wrong. If your little kid's doing something that they know that they're not supposed to be doing, and you come around the corner, they stop, right? They don't do it. My dog, if I come home and there's something chewed up in the floor, he looks at me like, okay, he won't look at me. He knows that something bad's about to happen. And so, but he can't control himself, right? And usually it's my fault for leaving something where, if you leave any kind of a wrapper that's had any kind of food touching it, he will chew it up. I mean, it's terrible. Anyways. So he also communicates His will through His written word, specifically through the 10 Commandments, right? If you want, that's where you start with all justice, is with the 10 Commandments. You work with those, and from there you can get to other stuff, but that's the primary place we get justice from, what's defined as. So, justice is essentially living out the 10 Commandments in our everyday relationships. It defines how we treat others, what kind of behavior is good and right, and what is not, right? It tells you do these things, don't do these things, right? It's clear. There's not any question about what it's trying to say. The Hebrew word, how do you pronounce that? Tesdik? I don't know. I mean, we don't have words like that in English with that many consonants. Anyways, typically translated as justice means a life in which all relationships, human to human, human to God, and human to creation, are well ordered and harmonious, right? Everything is going along as it should. Everything is living justly. We're living justly. Another aspect of justice is fair, impartial judgment. This is reserved for God-ordained authorities, including parents in the home, pastors in the church, and civil authorities in the state. There are many requirements related to this aspect of justice that are primarily dictated by the way God, the supreme authority in the universe, deals with people. Right? How does God deal with people? He does it justly, right? He is always going to be just. No matter what happens, He is just. So, fair and impartial judgment requires that authorities punish injustices. They right wrongs. Render judgments fairly. Treat everyone equally before the law. That's a requirement for justice. When you look at justice, that's what it should be. That's how it should be done. Why does justice require injustice to be punished? Why do we punish people? Why should people be punished? We don't want it to happen again, right? So that is setting an example, right? You see an example, you don't want to do this because the example is not something you want to participate in, right? We execute people who commit murder. Why? Because that's what you're supposed to do, and we don't want somebody else to participate in that, right? You don't want to get killed for what you did. Jeff?
This assumes that the law is just.
It does.
And I would say many times the law is not just. For the longest time, slavery was legal. That was the law.
Right.
And so now if you're sitting on a jury and you're judging if someone helped this slave escape, if you convict them of helping them this slave escape, are you being just? I would say no, you are not. You first must judge the law against God's law, and then you can judge if the person is guilty of breaking that law. If the law is not just, then the person can't be guilty of breaking the law.
Right. And that's why I said the law of the land changes depending on what the mood of the people is, right? It can change, and it's not always going to be right. Law is not always going to be right. Jim?
Back up a couple, we don't have to do that, but a couple of screens ago, you said that the Ten Commandments are the basis of justice.
Right.
We really only try to enforce, don't kill and don't steal.
Right.
The rest of them we pretty much ignore for the religious system.
They are. That's correct. And really, the church should have some kind of enforcement as well. Okay, I know that's not hard, that's not fun or whatever, but the church should be able to look at it and go, okay, that's not all right, and we're going to stop that. So is that, it's hard. It's hard to do that, you know, and have a congregation, if you will. So anyone else? Steve, what do you?
Like Pastor Coppersmith said in his sermon, justice and mercy, kind of how God puts those things together, because by leaving out justice, that's being merciful. But the opposite is also true. If you allow injustice to prevail, that's cruelty to the people who were the victims of whatever that crime was. And we see a lot of that in society today too. So by not punishing wrong or evil, that's a cruelty to those who it was inflicted upon. I gave the example of slavery. You could come up with 1,000 other examples. So.
Right, okay. So, justice means exacting an appropriate payment for a crime. No payment, no justice. Okay? Proper accounting requires the books to be balanced. So does justice. Okay? If you do something that's wrong, you should justly receive what you get for doing that. That's what, you know, that's it. And when Jeff was talking about, we all agree that there are laws, I'm sure they're not. But if there are laws that are unjust, we have to work to change those laws. That's where we start at, right? Slavery is no longer legal, right? Because they work to change that. Okay, so you can sell alcohol now and buy alcohol and drink alcohol in the country because that was incorrect, and they corrected that. It just took a while to get it done, right? When the Constitution was first written and put together, the Bill of Rights did not exist. But they looked at it and said, we need some more stuff in here to protect certain things. And so they put the Bill of Rights in there as an addendum to the Constitution, right? And so they looked at it, and that's kind of what happens as things evolve. Unfortunately, now we're evolving in a way that's directly contradictory to what Christ would do. But that's just the way things work. They happen that way. So, Romans 3. We heard this one this morning already. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. It doesn't say most or pretty much everybody. It says everybody, right? Every single person. Every person that ever lived, except for Christ, has dealt unjustly with God. He is ultimately the offended party. We have already been tried and found guilty, right? Whenever you do something that's not just, you're not offending me, you're not offending the state, you're offending God. And so that kind of comes back to, that's where things need to be understood in the beginning, is that we're talking about offending God. You know, we're talking about offending God. That's the basic problem. Romans 1. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. So, if you commit an injustice, what waits for you at that point? What's coming? God's wrath, right? God's wrath. Do you want to be in the hands of a wrathful and angry God? You do not, right? Did we see some people in the Bible that dealt with a wrathful God? And things didn't turn out well for them, right? Sodom and Gomorrah is still probably the best example of just an outright direct judgment by God on a group of people, right? He destroyed them all, and Lot's wife just as a bonus. So you don't want to be there. So if the story ended there, we would all be in a terrible position, facing nothing but the just wrath of an angry God, right? If that was where it stopped at, the Bible stopped right there, that was all it said about justice, we would not be in a good position. None of us would be. So, thankfully, justice is not the only aspect of God's character when it comes to such things. He is also abundantly merciful, right? He is. How much mercy does God exercise every day? Lots and lots and lots of mercy. So, mercy is the act of withholding justly deserved punishment. Imagine a world where mercy was never exercised by anyone, right? Where you were judged immediately for what you did, no matter what it was, and the penalty was always harsh. Do you want to live in a world like that? Probably not, right? We give the police the authority to write a warning as opposed to an actual ticket, right? They can look at the situation and hopefully judge rightly and go, okay, you're okay, you can go on, right? So it's just, we don't want to live in a world without mercy. So, here we go. Dr. Sproul. This is a great one. If you haven't seen this, this is one of the best videos ever. It should play, I think. And it's brief.
When I was a young college teacher, I had the task of teaching 250 freshmen in a college Introduction to the Old Testament. And on the first day of class, I had to give out the assignments, and I had to be very careful about what the requirements were because they'll twist them any way they can to get out from them. And I said, look, we have just a few little term papers here, 3 to 5 pages or 2 to 4 pages, short little papers. I said, 4 of them, if you don't turn them in on time, you get an F for the assignment unless you're confined in the infirmary or a death in the immediate family. I had to spell that out loud for them. So does everybody understand? Oh, yes, we agree. The first one's due September the 30th. September the 30th, 225 students diligently came forward with their term papers. 25 of the students were standing there shivering and shaking in fear, and they said, oh, Dr. Sproul, we didn't get our papers done. We didn't budget our time. We didn't make the transition from high school to college. Please, give us give us an F. Let us have a couple of days extension. I said, okay. I said, I'll let you have it this time, but don't let it happen again. Now remember next month, I want those papers here in time. October 30th came. 200 students came with their term paper. 50 of them don't have their term paper. So where's your term papers? They said, oh, Professor, everybody's term papers were due this week, and this week was homecoming, and we were busy with floats and all that stuff, but please give us one more chance. And I said, okay, I'll give you a 2-day extension. And you know what happened? They began to sing spontaneously, we love you, Prof. Sproul. Oh, yes, we do. I was the most popular professor on campus until November the 30th. November the 30th, 150 students came with their term paper. The other 100 walked in like they were going down the street for a loaf of bread. They were casual, relaxed, came in. I said, Johnson. He said, yes, sir. I said, where's your term paper? He said, hey, Prof, you know, don't worry about it. I'll have it for you in a couple days. And I took out the black book. I said, Johnson? He said, yes. I said, F. Ewald, where's your paper? I don't have it, sir. I said, F. Cunningham. F. About that time, somebody in the back of the room shouted out. You can guess what they shouted. What? That's not fair. Patrick, did you say that? He said, yes. I said, you said that's not fair. And he said, right. I said, do I recall that you didn't turn your paper in on time the last time? He said, that's right. I said, okay, if you want justice, you're going to get justice. And I wrote F for both. I said, anybody else? Anybody else want justice, ladies and gentlemen? We need to understand the difference between justice and mercy. The minute you think that God owes you mercy, a bell should go off in your brain that warns you and tells you that you're no longer thinking about mercy. For by definition, mercy is voluntary. God is never obligated to be merciful to a rebellious creature. He doesn't owe you mercy. As he has said, I will have mercy upon whom I will have mercy. And I'll close with this. A holy God is both just and merciful, never unjust. There is never an occasion in any page of sacred scripture where God ever punishes an innocent person. God simply doesn't know how to be unjust. I thank him every night that he does know how to be non-just. Because mercy is non-justice, but it is not injustice. And so I'll leave you with this. When you say your prayers, don't ever ask God to give you justice. He might do it. And if God were to deal with us according to justice, we would perish as swiftly as Nadab and Abihu and Uzzah and Ananias and Sapphira in the New Testament. But we live, beloved, by grace, by his mercy. And let's never forget it.
So, the question that must be answered is, can God be both just and merciful? Can he? He can be, right? So, Romans 9, he quoted this, says, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. So then it depends not on human will or exertion, but on God who has mercy. Right? God who has mercy. Now, that can either be a terrifying thing or a good thing, right? Because it means that we don't get to decide who God has mercy on. God decides who God has mercy on, right? So can you always count on God being merciful in your situation? And the answer is no, you can't. Why do we try to live like we should? Because we don't want to have to rely on God's mercy because he's not required to give it. You want to live like you should because you want to avoid the wrath of an angry God. You also want to live like you should because it's the right thing to do, but that's also an aspect of it, right? That's an aspect of it. So,
Chad, I'm going to disagree with you there.
okay, what is that?
And for those who have not been to early service, I want to give something up about the sermon. So I deserve justice,
You deserve justice.
but I know I will receive mercy. And the reason I know I will receive mercy is because Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, and because of that, I will receive mercy. Not necessarily for every little deed I do, what's the immediate outcome, but eternally.
We'll get to that.
I deserve justice, but I know I will receive mercy because of that cross body.
We will get to that, but no, I think that's incorrect because what you said is correct. There's no guarantee that for every little thing that goes on, you're going to receive mercy. Okay? Because so you speed and you get stopped, you get a ticket. That's not merciful. You got what you deserve for speeding. Okay? You overdose on drugs because you do drugs and you die. Okay? God could have saved your life, no doubt about it, but he did not. You got what you deserved. God did not show you mercy in that instance. There are instances where God does not show mercy, at least not in the physical world in which we live. Now, he's been extremely merciful in that he sent Christ to die for us. He could have sent every one of us to hell, and that would have been just. Justice could send every one of us to hell without a trial. We've already been convicted of our sin. But God is merciful in that he chooses to save Some. Not all, but some. So there's no guarantee of mercy is what I'm saying. That's why we live our lives like we should. You don't live your life in a way that is contrary to God's direction and expect things to go okay. That's what I'm saying. Because what you're saying is that's correct. We can do whatever we want to, and we're going to find mercy no matter what we do. And that's not what God tells us to do. God tells us, live like I tell you, and then you won't have to have mercy. Do what I tell you, and then you'll get what you deserve, which is good and not bad. And so I see what you're saying, and what you're saying is correct. But what I'm saying is we can't do things that are stupid and expect for them to turn out good every time because God's always merciful. He's not. Sometimes some things happen that are bad, right? So for Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit. God isn't just casting aside the sin of man without any penalty. That would be unjust. Okay? The amazing thing is that he gave his Son as payment for our sin. The price was paid by Christ through his sacrifice. So, if God just forgave people no matter what without sacrificing Christ, that would not be just. Okay? That would say that we're getting away with something that we should have had to pay for. But we're not, because Christ paid for it on our behalf. That's why God can be merciful, because he sacrificed his Son as a payment for our sin. That's a very important thing to understand, that God's not forgiving you just like it didn't happen. God's forgiving you because Christ took the penalty for you, and that's important, right? He's not being merciful and unjust. He is being merciful and just at the same time because Christ has paid the penalty. It's a huge penalty. It's a huge and difficult thing. Would I sacrifice my children for people so that they could act like they want to and still go to heaven? Probably not. So, while not perfect, we are fortunate to live in a society that is seen as relatively just. Societies such as this have been the exception, right? Not the rule. How much injustice has there been in the world? Lots of injustice. Societies that are relatively just have several hallmarks in common, including respect for the rule of law. They accept that there is a moral law higher than themselves and a supreme lawgiver to whom even the most powerful are accountable. Right? Everybody is under the law. You don't get to live however you want to because you're the president or because you're whatever, the mayor or whatever. You have to live like everybody else has to live. If I've got to do something, you've got to do something. If I've got to pay taxes, you've got to pay taxes. If I can only drive 70, you can only drive 70. You know, that's the way things are. So, human dignity and God-granted human rights. All human beings are created in God's image and as such have equal dignity, incalculable worth, and rights that cannot be taken away. Okay, there are rights that we all have that are granted because we're just human. That God has outlined that these are your rights, right? And so that's some interesting definition stuff there that goes back and forth in different directions depending on what you're looking at. So, a check on corruption. Societies are built in the image of God or gods they worship. If they are selfish, capricious, and unpredictable gods, society will follow. Our God is righteous, just, truthful, and immutable. So we expect that if something is corrupt, that eventually they will weed out the corruption and stop it, right? Sometimes it goes on for years and years, but eventually you hope they get it weeded out and stopped. We expect that to happen. Establishing due process. We all heard due process, right? There's a bunch of stuff. So you have the right to a timely trial, the presumption of innocence, the right of the accused to know what they are accused of, the right of the accused to face their accusers, the right to be represented by legal counsel, and the right of the accused to defend themselves, including the calling of witnesses. We just accept that we should have those rights if we face a legal issue, right? Those are things that we should be able to do. Has it always been the case? Of course not, right? I mean, how many people have been punished without any kind of trial or without any kind of... I mean, you can look at... They're talking about societies. In Nazi Germany, was this the case? You know? Absolutely not. In the Soviet Union, was this the case? Absolutely not. And so, does anybody want to move from here to Russia? and live in Russia today. There was a story I read this week about some guy who moved from Texas to Russia because he said that the government in the United States was, how do you put it, unholy, basically. And so the Russian government was better than we were at ensuring that everybody's treated equally or whatever. And so he gets over there, and what happens to him as soon as he gets there? They put him in the army and send him straight to the front lines to fight. And his wife and kids are in Moscow wondering where he's at, and they haven't heard from him in 6 months. So would that have happened if he'd stayed here in Texas? Probably not, right? So we can do stupid things occasionally, and he's getting his justice. So everyone's familiar with the Miranda rights. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but you hear that like whenever TV shows when somebody gets stopped and the cops pull over, you have the right to remain silent, blah, blah, blah. We expect that to be done, right? It's just something we think. And now, if you got stopped and they were arresting you, would you expect to hear somebody tell you these things? You would, right? Because you see it on TV all the time. It happens every time. It should. Okay. Man, there's too much stuff here. So entrusting final judgment to God, not every wrong will be righted on the side of Christ's return. They remember that the ultimate justice is to be dispensed thoroughly and completely only by Christ, and the day of ultimate accounting is coming, right? We cannot expect everything to be just on this side of Christ's return. There's going to be injustice. There just is. Now, we're responsible for looking for injustice and doing what we can to correct it, but we shouldn't be surprised to see it happen. It's always going to be here. We're not going to be able to stamp it out. So, today an ideology described as social justice has radically redefined the classic understanding of justice. So, it's characterized by obsession with power, oppression, and victimization. Use of tactics reminiscent of Mao's Cultural Revolution, and it ends justify the means methodology. So what was Mao's Cultural Revolution? Anybody? It's when the communists took over China, right? That's what it did. Jen, do you have a... And they murdered millions of people in the name of converting the country to communism. Millions of people died.
Yeah, they did. Anybody who was considered to be an intellectual, who was a lawyer, who was a doctor, anything that was Western related, they sent them to re-education camps.
Right.
And they went through, and a lot of people didn't come back out of those camps.
Right.
Finally released. And not only that, it got worse under Mao Zedong's wife and her little gang of 6. And she started taking out any enemies of people, so people could actually work for the Communist Party for a period of time.
Oh, okay.
And then everything would be turned on against them, and they could be prosecuted under trumped-up charges.
Right. And that's what we call injustice, right? Fixation on class, race, gender, and sexual orientation as characteristics. How are you defined? By these things, right? So you can be defined unequally with someone else, right? Whenever we define people by everybody's created by God, everybody's in the same boat. The only reason you and I have anything any better than anybody else or any hope is because of what God has done. Not because of what I've done or not because of what you've done, but because of what God has done for us. We didn't do any of it for ourselves. So, hostility toward Judeo-Christian religion, particularly its beliefs about family and sexuality, right? One husband, one wife. Homosexuality is typically viewed as being incorrect, those type things. Antipathy toward the natural family, husband, wife, children. Fixation on redistributing wealth and power by an ever larger state, right? They want everybody to at least be seen as equal, right? Nobody owns anything that anybody else doesn't own. Everybody has the same house. Everybody has the same job. Everybody makes the same amount of money. There's no real incentive for doing better, right? Because everybody's the same. And no matter what you do, the outcome for you is going to be the same as the outcome for the guy next door. Nothing's going to change. Yes?
That's the idea. But a lot of these things are put into place, and you'll notice the people that do it are always doing it for everybody else's own good. But they are never, like you said, equal under the law. They are never, accountable to live under the same thing that they impose on everybody else for their own good. Most
Right.
of the problems in this country would go away overnight if Congress passed a law, thou shalt not pass any law to which you are exempted from, period. Like, if that was the case, you wouldn't have all these issues with Social Security. I mean, if everybody had Congress's deal, like, you can go to and work for 2 years, and you get your pension 100% $1,000 and a ham sandwich, they get $400,000 a year for the rest of their life. Exactly.
Right. So, like I said, we don't live in a just society. However, it's more just than a lot of societies in the world, right? You would anticipate, if you get arrested, you assume you're going to have a trial, and you're going to have the representation, and that you can fight for your rights, right? Is it always going to turn out like it should? No, it is not. So, justice is now defined as the deconstruction of traditional systems and structures deemed to be oppressive and redistributing power and resources from oppressors to the victims in pursuit of equality of outcome. Equality of outcome is a very important concept that you have to understand. What they're talking about here is at the end, everybody's got the same stuff, right? In the end, we're all equal. We have the same amount of money, we have the same amount of property, we have the same everything. If I'm driving a Chevrolet, everybody is driving a Chevrolet. You know, it's that kind of a thing. That's what they want things to be like. That's what they want. So, ideological social justice, which is what we're talking about, is best perhaps defined as a postmodern religion alternative to Christianity, right? This is a lot of people's religion. This is what they look at as what drives them. It's what's important to them. It's what they think should be done, no matter what. So essayist Robert Sullivan explains, for many, especially the young, discovering a new meaning for life is thrilling, isn't it? It is, right? You discover something that, man, this is great. This is the way things should be, and it makes you want to get involved. That's what they're talking about. Social justice ideology does everything a religion should. It offers an account of the whole that human life and society must be seen entirely as a function of social power and structures. That it's your religion. It's what you want to do. It's your religion if you do this. So social justice ideology should be understood as comprehensive worldview. At its core, it has a number of presuppositions that must be answered, including what is ultimately real? Who are we? What is our fundamental problem as humans? What is the solution to that problem? What is our purpose in life? Can we answer all those questions? Do we have good answers for them? We probably should if we're going to debate these people, right? Because they do. Allergies, horrible things. So they've been getting worse. Does anybody else have allergies that get worse the older you get? I mean, whenever I was a kid, I never really noticed allergies. Now it's killing me every day. It's ridiculous. So, ideological social justice answers all these questions and many more, giving shape to a comprehensive worldview. Now, this is a lot to look at. So, who are we? Creatures whose identity is wholly socially determined. We are products of our race, sex, and gender identity. The biblical worldview says creations and image bearers of a God, of a good, holy, loving God with inherent identity, inherent dignity, and measurable worth. Right? That's a big difference in the two things, right? A huge difference. What's our fundamental problem? Oppression. White, heteronormative males have established and maintained power structures to oppress women, people of color, and sexual minorities. That, of course, is not what we believe. So rebellion. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Our rebellion against God has resulted in broken relationships between God and man. Right? That's our main problem. We rebelled against God. What's the solution? Revolution, in their opinion. In ours, the gospel. Right? Which solution is better? The gospel. Right? So how can we be saved? Victims are morally innocent and do not need salvation. If you've been victimized, you're okay, right? But you have to understand that they don't believe in a life after this, right? So the only justice you're going to get is the justice that you get here in this world. They don't look for anything else. And so what's our, how can we be saved? If you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, right? It's really pretty simple. Now, there's some more stuff we have to talk about there, but that's outlined, that's correct. So, what's our primary moral duty? To stand in solidarity with, protect, and defend the oppressed women, people of color, and sexual minorities. Us, to love God with all our heart, all our soul, all our mind, all our strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Which one sounds better? Which one makes more sense? Right? So, is there a future judgment? No, there is no future judgment, right? Whatever's going to happen is going to happen here, and there's nothing coming after this. Don't worry about it. What's the Christian view? Yes, there is, right? A coming judgment day. Now, there's a lot of different views about what that's going to look like, okay, in Christian circles. I like the Lutheran view, which basically says, yes, Christ is coming back, but is he going to judge us for our sin at that time? No. He is not. Because what does the Bible say? It says your sin is forgotten, right? Whenever you become a child of God, your sin is forgotten. If your sin's forgotten, there's no record of it. We move on past it, as long as your name's in the book of life. So that's a good thing, right? Some people worry about the coming judgment day, about what have I done and what's God going to say and what's God going to do to me for what I've done. No. There's going to be, I'm not going to have quite the nicest room in heaven because I've done these things, but, no. We're not going to even be concerned about those kind of things, I don't think. But anyways, there's a lot of stuff there. We could spend a week talking about this, just this. So, ideological social justice has its core in a counterfeit definition of justice. It redefines justice to mean deconstructing traditional systems. We've already went over that. So who is that guy? Is he a hero? He is, right? But not really. So, while Robin Hood is seen as a romantic hero, the redistribution of resources by whatever means necessary is not just. But he was dealing with an unjust government, right? But in Texas, we have the Robin Hood plan. What does that deal specifically with? The redistribution of wealth between school districts, right? Your district can't have more than my district. Your district has to spend the same amount per child as this district does. Is that right? You can argue either way if you want to, but I would say it's not. Okay, because, my kids all went to Zion Lutheran Church and school, right? And so they got whatever Zion Lutheran thought was right for them to have. That's how things were done. That's fine with me. And so I don't believe in redistribution of wealth to a large degree, okay? If people are in need, we help them. But we don't dictate that I have to pay my taxes here and the taxes get sent somewhere else. Yeah, I don't like that personally. Just my opinion. So, equity versus equality. In the Bible, equality refers to the equality all people possess as image bearers of God. We're all the same, right? In the classic Marxist worldview, equity means equality of outcome. In other words, sameness, uniformity, and interchangeability. Everybody is exactly the same. Now, I want to for sure get to this. Let's see, I think I went. It's ironic that ideological social justice claims to be committed to diversity, while its logical and unavoidable consequence is, if successful, is there will be no diversity whatsoever and all people will be exactly the same. Diversity. Along with equality, the other supreme value of ideological social justice is diversity. Have we heard anything about diversity in the news lately? Right? And here it is, DEI. The phrase diversity, equity, or inclusion is the beating heart of social justice movement. Countless schools, organizations, and institutions loudly champion their core commitment to these goals, right? Do we hear that a lot? We do, right? Steve?
It also depends on how you define diversity, right? They define diversity by characteristics of individuals based on skin, sexual orientation, things like that. But real diversity in its truest form is diversity of thought. They don't tolerate that.
Right.
There is no diversity of thought.
That's correct.
You don't think like me, and you will be enforced by whatever means necessary. So true diversity is the diversity of ideas, but they don't allow that in the real world. Only the categories that they define and put you in, and you're not allowed to go outside of it.
Right. That's absolutely correct. So diversity without unity leads to chaos and conflict. Unity without diversity leads to stifling totalitarian conformity. Human flourishing requires both. You have to have diversity and you have to have unity as well. So I want to be sure and get to... It's interesting to consider that within the very Trinitarian nature of God the Father, the Son, and Spirit, a perfect picture of the coexistence of diversity and unity exists. These three persons are distinct, each with distinct attributes, yet they are all one in purpose, right? God the Son, God the Spirit, God the Father. They do different things, but they're moving in the same direction all the time. They're all working toward the same goal. There's no difference in what they're looking for. They are completely united, okay? The same concept is clearly demonstrated in the body of believers in the local community and on a worldwide basis, right? Romans 12. For as in one body we may have many members, and the members do not all have the same function, so we, though many, are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another. Having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let us use them. Right? What does that say? Are we all the same? Do we all have the same gifts, the same talents, the same things we're good at? If everybody was a pastor in the church, would we ever get anything done? Get a lot of talking done, but that would be about it. So, that's not to say anything bad about pastors, but it's true. So, what are some additional examples of diverse members working together to accomplish a common purpose? What can you think of that happens all the time? Where we have diversity, but they work together and accomplish something.
Well, when you go to boot camp, you've got a diverse population, and you are all molded into
A unit.
a unit.
The military, right? The military is an example. Right. So, husband and wife, right? Husband and wife are not even close to the same, but should they work together to accomplish the same goals? Absolutely. Parents and children. Do your parents believe like you do? Do your children believe like you do? Probably not. So, successful businesses. In a successful business, everybody doesn't get to do the same job. Not everybody gets to be in charge. Some people have to go out and actually do something, right? Businesses. Sports teams. Does everybody on a football team do the same thing? They do not. Does everybody on the baseball team do the same thing? They do not. They work together to accomplish a goal. They may be very distinctly different in their purpose, but the end goal is the same, right? And like Jeff said, military, units and armies, right? All working together to accomplish a goal. So, man, we're out of time. Let's see here. We're going to move. I want to get here. So how should we then live? Do not be anti-ideological social justice. Be pro-biblical justice. Okay? You do what you know is right. Do that first. Okay? That's how we're going to change things. Christians must be committed to cultural transformation. God has called His children to take dominion over this world and all that is in it. It is all His creation and important to Him, and thus it should be important to us. Okay? Do something. Don't just let it happen. Do something. The biblical worldview sees evangelism and spiritual regeneration not as an end, but as a means to an end. For the reconciliation of all things, for a person to lead a life that is right and pleasing to God, they must be a Christian. It's just that simple. If you want to change the world, change people's hearts. That's how you do it. That's the only way to really do it. So a person must first be changed inwardly and spiritually before the change can be manifested externally in society and culture. The problems aren't external to churches and Christians, rather they are ever present in our fallen hearts and minds. Do we live completely peacefully within the church? No. Does injustice happen within the church? Yes. Change it. I think so. My favorite verse in the Bible. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and perfect and acceptable. Right? Change people's minds, and you'll change the world. That's what you have to do. But you change it to the way God thinks, not the way we think. While it's easy to have a negative view concerning the current state of Western culture, our attitude shouldn't be marked by a negative, critical, and ungrateful spirit. We're lucky, people. We're very lucky to be living where we're at and we can do things we can do. Instead, we should approach the topic with humble gratitude. Ultimately, our blessings come from God Himself, right? We can complain all we want to. We can talk about how bad things are, but ultimately, God is merciful. And I'm very thankful to be where I'm at and to have what I have. So we've got to change injustice, but be thankful for what you've got at the same time. All right? All right, that's it. Any questions or comments before we go? Are we good?